Perfect. Can you start today by telling me about your economic plan?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In terms of economic plans, what we're hearing a lot today is things just really aren't affordable. Affordability is the big keyword. I would actually go a lot further than that. I would say that we are living under an economic structure for the past 40 or so years, characterized by an economic policy that's commonly known as trickle-down economics, where we tax wealthy people and corporations far less than we tax everyday people like you and me. And that has resulted in an explosion of economic inequality. The promise of trickle down economics was that if we give more money to rich people and wealthy corporations, then it would somehow kind of magically trickle down to everyday folks like you and me. And that just hasn't happened. And we know that that hasn't happened because while economic growth has been extremely robust, wages have remained relatively stagnant. So, my economic plan involves giving more tax breaks to everyday folks, workers, working families, retired folks, young people, and raising taxes on high earners, wealthy folks, and wealthy corporations.
In your own words, do you believe that the American dream has become unaffordable?
Yes, it absolutely has become unaffordable. I can cite several examples just off the top of my head, but the first example that comes to mind is buying a home. And I think that's the most salient example for most people. Just to give an off the cuff example, my parents were 26 years old when they bought a home back in the late 1980s. That was just kind of the age that people moved out of an apartment and bought their first starter home. I was 37 when I was lucky enough to buy my first home. And really, I was only able to buy it because of the interest rates, what they were during COVID in 2020. So, looking forward to the next generation, does that mean that my kids are going to have to wait till they're 48 years old to buy their first home? And are they going to have to work until they're 78 years old to pay off a 30-year mortgage? That's not a sustainable trajectory.
Would you have voted yes or no on the Epstein Files Transparency Act? Sorry for the,
I
the switch from economics to this.
will solve myself, and I have
Oh, I'm sorry,
a
you
great,
froze. I'm very sorry you froze for a second. Could you restart?
yeah, um, yes. I would have voted yes on the Epstein Files Transparency Act to release all the files. I'm an activist for survivors of sexual assault, and I'm actually a survivor of, and I have a lot of admiration for victims who issue into public awareness.
Um, just let me one second
Sure.
test my thing. So I got up until so you would have voted yes, and then because sorry, just I think
Okay.
the connection on my end was bad.
Okay. Um, okay. I'm just checking to make sure that it's not the connection on my end. Um, the I would have voted yes on the Epstein Files Transparency Act. I am actually an activist for survivors of sexual assault, and I'm actually a survivor of childhood sexual assault myself. And I have a great deal of admiration for the Epstein victims and how they are working so hard to thrust their experience into public awareness. I think it's doing a great job raising awareness for all survivors of sexual assault.
Now, would you have voted yes or no on the Stop Illegal Entry Act of 2025?
The Stop Illegal Entry Act of 2025,
Yes.
I would have voted yes on that. I do think that we need a stronger border.
Okay. Um, Now here's these next set of questions have a little bit of data in them, so I can go slower if you need me to. I
Okay.
tend to read a little bit fast, but I will um, adjust for you. According to census data, Illinois lost almost 300,000 people between the last two censuses, while the U.S. has, as a whole, gained a 7% growth in population. What needs to be done to make Illinois a state that sees population growth over the next decade?
I think a lot of that speaks to state level issues in terms of budgets and taxing and having less taxes on kind of regular everyday folks like you and me, and more taxes on wealthy corporations and individuals to fill that tax hole. But where it speaks to a federal issue, I think, is this is that a lot of times when states implement those kind of tax policies, wealthy individuals and corporations, they'll just move to domicile or have residency in another state in order to get more favorable tax treatment in that other state. So where the federal government needs to step in here is making those tax increases for the top 1% for wealthy people and for corporations across the board through all 50 states. And then we don't get this effect where if Illinois just adjusts our tax brackets and the wealthy people move to another state to to get to get better tax treatment. So I think that's the federal government's role here.
Now, there was a controversial moment uh, for a lot of people within the party last year when Senator Durbin was one of the few Democratic senators that voted with Republicans to reopen the government during that shutdown. Would you have done the same as he had done?
I would not. I don't think that the timing on that vote was very good judgment. I would have waited at least a few more weeks to see, because at that time, which was about a week or so before Thanksgiving, there was a significant amount of a week or two before Thanksgiving, there was a significant amount of momentum in the Democrats' position, and the Democrats were winning that shutdown fight in terms of bringing more awareness to the issue of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. And at that moment, to vote to reopen the government killed all of that momentum on that issue. And as of yet, the Senate still hasn't found a way to take that issue back up. And waiting at least a few more weeks to consider that vote, I think, would have been far better judgment.
Now, polling data shows that at least 70% of Americans believe biological males should have no place in women's sport. This past year, Illinois Senators Duckworth and Durbin voted no on the Protect Women in Sports Act. How would you have voted should biological males compete in girls' sports in high schools in Illinois?
I would have voted no with Senator Durbin and Duckworth. And I frankly think that this is an issue that does not warrant the amount of public attention that it gets. This affects a few dozen people throughout the entire country. And I think that those folks are more than capable of handling this issue at the local level with their schools, in their communities, and that this issue has sucked up so much national public attention is frankly shameful, because we have so many other more glaring problems that affect so many more people than this issue does. And it's my personal opinion that this issue is continually brought up by Republicans to distract and inflame people away from the more pressing issues that our country has to face.
Now, with the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill this past year, we got the no tax on tips. However, in Illinois, along with Maine and the District of Columbia, they have decided not to accept that and continue to tax tips. Do you support taxing tips?
I do not support taxing tips. I think this is a common sense policy. It's one of the few policies that I agree with Republicans on. I think it's a common sense policy to give working people a break And so I don't think we should be taxing tips.
Okay, and the last question I have for you today, thank you again for taking this time. Um, there are currently multiple bills surrounding artificial intelligence, many of them with bipartisan support. What kind of guidelines, safeguards, and policies do you think the federal government needs to implement to keep Americans safe from AI and to keep Americans from losing jobs to AI?
There's a number of things. This is a massive area. There's a number of things that um, come up off the top of my head. Um, the first thing that I think that we need is anything made with artificial intelligence that goes out there into the social media or media space needs to be labeled or have a watermark that it was generated using artificial intelligence. That's just a basic thing to do to um, control the control misinformation. Um, that's the first thing. Second thing is I do think that AI does need to be regulated by the federal government. There's this big debate between Republicans and Democrats whether AI needs to be regulated. Most Republicans seem to think that there doesn't need to be any regulation. Most Democrats seem to think that there does need to be some regulation. I fall into the latter category, and it is my impression that the race to develop artificial intelligence is moving extremely quickly, that most folks who work on Capitol Hill don't really understand what is happening in that race to develop artificial intelligence. And so the first thing is that I think there needs to be a lot more of um, collaboration and cooperation between the government and the companies that are developing artificial intelligence, a lot more information sharing. Maybe that's something you mandate in a bill. Maybe it's something where everybody comes together and agrees to voluntarily share that information. But then as a result of that process, we need to set up some kind of governmental commission that's going to oversee the development of artificial intelligence. Third, we are going to see some kind of economic restructuring from artificial intelligence. And I think the best thing to do is to, one, be training people to use artificial intelligence so that they can continue to keep abreast in the job market. I do think that we probably will see some economic realignment with like folks losing their job. And that's where ideas like guaranteed minimum monthly income come in, where, well, let me start over. That's where ideas like guaranteed minimum monthly income come in, and also government sponsored job retraining. When I think of AI, I'm reminded of the raft of free trade agreements that came through in the 1990s. And the government at that time did a completely terrible job at job retraining, guaranteeing that folks had basic income with the drying up of manufacturing jobs that was occurring. And we can't be making that same mistake again. So I think that the minimum monthly income and the and job training, as well as making sure people are trained in the use of artificial intelligence, is the way to go.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Robbie. I appreciate it.
Where can people find information about you, information about your campaign real quick, and then we'll get you out of here.
Thank you for asking. I would ask you to check out my website, dean4il.com. And then I would also ask folks to check me out on social media sites. They can find my account at the handle Dean, the number 4IL.